Okay, I got this little clip from Fox that I wanted to discuss, so let's go ahead and get started with it.
Of being a racist.
He was executed for WWB in a GC, walking while black in a gated community.
Is that the most ridiculous thing you've ever heard? No, Trayvon was not executed for walking while black in a gated community. He was shot in self-defense while beating a man. Big difference. I mean, do these people even think out what they're going to say before they say it? This is supposed to be a congressman, I believe. I don't know. I get the feeling like this was all pre-planned. Somebody gave him these words. I don't even think he thought that up. Somebody gave that to him. That's my opinion, anyhow. Well, let's go ahead and continue.
Trayvon was hunted down like a rabid dog.
Trayvon was hunted down by like a rabid dog. That's really, really a fact. That's in the evidence, I believe, right? This is Congress people. Is there any accountability? I know that they have the right to say whatever they want on the floor of the House, but when they come out here in public, aren't they held accountable like everybody else? To me, that is illegal. How can you say that George hunted down Trayvon like a rabid dog? That's not in evidence.
He was shot in the street.
No, he was shot between houses in the backyards. That's where he was shot, not in the street.
He was racially profiled.
So now you're saying it as if it's fact that he was racially profiled, but we know better because the FBI just came out with their report saying that it's not true.
But a new FBI report paints a different picture. The report, which was based on interviews with nearly 36 people, says there was no evidence Zimmerman was motivated by race when he shot Trayvon Martin. So will this new information help the defense? Joining us now from Orlando, Florida,
Definitely going to help the defense. If you think about it, the whole case was predicated on racism. This was the whole beginning. I'm going to make a video, and I'm just going to take little tiny clips from news reports after this broke, and I'm not going to be selective. I'm just going to say I'm going to grab 10 clips based on, these are clips on Trayvon, and we'll see how many of them come out with information that's even close to factual based on what we know today. That should be very interesting.
Criminal defense attorney Diana Tennis, and here in studio, former prosecutor Joey Jackson. Ms. Tennis, let's begin with you. How relevant is the fact that George Zimmerman's friends say he's not a racist?
Well, it's extremely relevant. First of all, it's not just a report, it's an FBI report. FBI agents are seen as professional, more objective, and they're more credible to juries. And number two, the second-degree murder charge has to have an element of strong feelings, hatred, ill will, spite, anger. That is the basis of second-degree murder. And if you don't have this guy profiling, stalking, and going after this young man because he's black, you don't have second-degree murder. So I think this is a huge upset for the state, and I think it's going to be a real big thing for the defense.
Joey Jackson, now what you just heard from Ms. Tennis is second degree requires that notion of malice.
Yes.
But what if it's the case that he thought this young man, again, being black, wearing the hoodie, was suspicious? Could that also be then?
Absolutely. Look, Juan, let's be clear. This is not a federal civil rights prosecution that's predicated upon race. It's a prosecution based on second-degree murder. It's not about whether he's a racist. It's about whether his actions that night were appropriate and if he acted with depravity. So I would suggest to you that although the FBI reports, maybe it would have helped the prosecution had they come back and said that there was some racism in his background, right? I don't think that this is a death knell at all. And I don't...
Well, of course he's going to say that. He's the guy that has been arguing all along that Trayvon was racially profiled. But now that he's saying, oh, it's not necessary for the case for it to be second-degree murder. Well, you have to get depravity of mind, and that's where they were going with it. So now they have to go some other angle. I mean, you've got all the witnesses stating that George is on the bottom, fighting for his life. Trayvon on top. I mean, we don't really have. That's the big picture right now. Is George is fighting for his life. We know that. Some people will say, it wasn't for his life. He knew that this kid couldn't really hurt him, and he was just putting on a good show before he was going to shoot him. And that's just ridiculous. That's not even funny. And I wish that somebody could allow those people to be in that position. So this guy's going to suggest that the state still has a case, even though there is no racism involved, and we'll see how he goes on this one.
I think it's entirely relevant to moving forward and to them establishing his case. What he did that night, that's what we're focusing on. Was it appropriate? Did he act with the type of reasonableness what the law requires? The prosecution will say no, making this report a non-factor.
And why would the prosecution say no? What did he do? Well, in the worst case scenario, we've got him getting out of his truck after losing sight of Trayvon, because he said George said that Trayvon turned south, or he turned towards the back of the back entrance. So we know that, and we've already made the map and figured out. We can hear him getting out of his car. We know where his car was parked, and we know where the T in the sidewalk is. So we can look at that on the map and say the distance from where he gets out of his car to where that T is, where Trayvon is turning to go south. That tells us that Trayvon has a huge lead. He can easily get away. Let's continue.
All right, Ms. Tennis, but a jury is going to say, is this guy a racist? Is that what I'm really dealing with? And I wonder now if, in fact, the defense, and you're a defense attorney, if the defense is going to say, you know what, there is no evidence. Look at the FBI report.
Well, right, and I disagree with Joey. This isn't about reasonableness. Second-degree murder is not about acting unreasonably. Maybe you get manslaughter for reckless indifference and unreasonableness. You do not get second-degree murder for acting unreasonably, and I think the jury at this point is not going to be able to hear those words that the state wants them to hear. Profiling. That word, I think, is going to be excised from this trial, because it's no longer going to be George Zimmerman went after this kid because he's black, and I don't think the state's going to be able to spin it that way, and that's certainly where they've gone so far.
Two things, Diane, and I hear you, but it's not about words, it's about actions. How did he act? That's what has to be looked at, and reasonableness comes back to two things. It comes back to the stand your ground hearing, if his lawyer determines that he should get one, and whether or not his actions were appropriate.
Did he say if his lawyer determines if he should get a stand your ground defense? Excuse me? I don't think the lawyer or anyone else makes that decision other than George, and he's already claimed self-defense. He did that to the police on that night. That's where the self-defense, that's where stand your ground was in effect. It actually, legally, under our law, it came into effect that night. That's why they didn't arrest him. I think that's a lot of the problem we have with people's misconception with this case. They don't understand that the case has moved outside of its logical place. It's supposed to be, we have the DA's office that takes care of this. We don't have a special prosecutor that does that. We don't just do that. So the reason that the governor decided to make this a state case and bring the special prosecutor was because there was a charge of racism, because of the fact that the FBI and the Justice Department had decided to get involved. That's when he decided to make this case. That's why there is a case right now. Which means now that we know there is no racism involved, that tells us that there should be no case at all. That means that the governor should call back his special prosecutor, have her drop the charges and move away and stop this. Go back to the DA, hand it back to the DA, and say, okay, guys, we're sorry. We stepped in. We stepped on your toes. It was our mistake. So, we're sorry. But we know that's not going to happen. So let's continue.
To those circumstances, did he stand his ground, and did he act in those circumstances as a person in his position would? And so
Oh,
again,
slow down, Joey. Explain
yes.
to the audience. By stand your ground,
Sure.
you mean did he feel threatened?
Exactly,
And was
Juan.
the threat justification then for him to take action shooting Trayvon Martin?
You portray it exactly right, because
So was the threat a 6 foot, whatever, 168 pound 17-year-old on top of you with your head against the concrete, bashing you, broke your nose, and your eyes are full of blood, and he's banging your head on the concrete. Now you picture this, put yourself here. You're laying on the concrete. The guy's banging your head. You're trying to slide off the concrete, okay? You slide yourself down and you get off the concrete. But as you do so, it pushes your jacket up, and suddenly the handle of your pistol becomes visible. You had not even considered pulling that gun at this point. And now this kid who's beating you has looked down and he sees the gun. And what's he say? Well, George said this that night, so chances are good what he said that night is pretty close to what really happened. He said, "You're going to die, motherfucker." That's what he said. That's what Trayvon told George. And he reached down for the gun. Fortunately, Trayvon was probably worn out from the ground and pound that he was putting down on George. That wears you out. So he didn't have the strength to get to that gun as much as George had. Remember, George was in an adrenaline rush, which definitely gives him some extra strength. Let's continue.
now if there's an immunity hearing, should his lawyer decide to go that route, and we don't know if he will, Juan. Why? Because this judge says some pretty tough things about his client, that is Mr. Zimmerman, and about whether or not he's a liar, whether he manipulated the court system based upon his other lies and other...
None of that matters in a stand your ground hearing. In fact, the judge has to act like he would with if he was dealing with a jury. He has to eliminate any side issues, anything that has nothing to do with the actual case. The fact that George lied about stealing a $5 bill when he was 10 years old, that might be evidence that he started lying early on. But do you think that they're going to allow that into court if that were really true? No, of course not. And all the other issues that he's had in his life, there may be several. They're not going to bring none of that will matter unless it ties directly to the idea that George had a depraved mind. That's the only kind of things that they can draw in. So if they could come in and say, well, look, the guy is depraved, and look at the kind of stuff that he was doing just before. But they can't, and they won't. Let's continue.
details. But if his lawyer decides to have this immunity hearing, what is going to be at issue is his veracity and what he stated before to the police.
No, what's going to be at issue is all the evidence and the facts and the witnesses. That's what's going to be at issue. The judge is supposed to look at the facts. He says, okay, what happened? And we can lay out the timeline with the sounds. It's real easy. The judge doesn't have to abide by all the same rules that we have to when we're introducing evidence to a jury, because juries aren't as well informed of the law. A judge can take information and he can weed out stuff that he's not supposed to take into consideration. He can see it and physically and then say, I'm not allowed to look at that, even though he's seen it. And he can take that out of consideration. So that's what's happening. That's what the deal is. If they don't do a stand your ground motion before the trial, before any trial even tries to get started, then that shows that his lawyer is incompetent. If that were to happen, then there would definitely be an opportunity for him to if he ever were to be convicted, he could easily be, bring that up and get a whole new trial. All right, here we go.
Please, what did he feel? What did he think? What did he do? He has to testify, and he's going to be cross-examined.
Right, he's going to be cross-examined about what did he feel, what did he see, what did he think, what was going on in his mind at the moment that he was under attack. They're not going to ask questions about, you were in jail and you were and you had these conversations with your wife and blah blah blah. None of that's going to come up. Nothing to do with any of the issues that, and if there were issues with his story and now he's corrected them so that they fit the timeline and they fit all this evidence, all that, the judge can look at that and say, well, why'd you change it? But he'd have to come up with at least a very reasonable alternative to the timeline that's laid out, the timeline that we all have. So with that information, if the judge were to deny the stand your ground, then that would definitely be a reason to overturn any conviction. So continue.
Ms. Tennis, when I come back to this, I come back again to the idea that you saw in those video clips, you have members of Congress, you have the civil rights community yelling racism, and there's no racism apparently according to an impartial investigation by the FBI. How would that affect an immunity hearing? How does that affect public perception going into the trial and jury selection?
Well, I think it affects it a lot. You've got to have passion in order to have second-degree murder. And those actions that we're talking about, the racial stuff, was all the stuff that led up to George Zimmerman being on the ground on his back and having the stuffing beaten out of him. If you don't have him having a reason to have caused the situation, then all you have is him being beaten and shooting somebody who just broke his nose.
Counselors, we got to go, but thank you so much, because this is going to be an ongoing conversation across the country.
So that's the end of the video. I thought that it was very telling that at this point we haven't found any smoking gun or any information that the state, all this time we've had this constant in the back saying, oh, well, they're hiding, they're holding back, because there just isn't, they don't make their case, not even close. And now this new information with the FBI, which is under Obama's control, saying, sorry, guys, we as hard as we tried to make this a racial case, as hard as we looked, and believe me, there was no rock left unturned. We couldn't find anything. There's just nothing. So, no racial reasoning for it. So take that out of the picture. Why did he go after Trayvon? Why was he following him? We know why. Everybody knows why. It's just, but do you think that now this is going to solve the race baiter issue? You think they're going to stop? Do you think that Jesse Jackson's going to come out now and apologize? Do you think that that Obama's going to come out and say, you know what, I'm sorry for involving myself in this case. I'm sorry for suggesting that laws need to be changed. Maybe I should have shut up and waited until this case finished on its own before I made a suggestion that laws need to be changed. Maybe this was a perfect example of how the law should work, that George should have never been arrested, and that the DA's office was doing exactly what was correct and what the law required, and as the law was intended, exactly how the author of the law intended it, exactly as how the legislature intended it, exactly as the people intended it. But do you think they're going to come out and say, thank you, we're so sorry that we said these things, and we appreciate that you guys are not going to hold us responsible? I don't think so. Talk to you guys later.